Mara lived near the edge of a quiet, dusty town where broken machines rested under the sun like forgotten stories. The town had one long road, a silent airstrip, and people who believed nothing new ever happened there. Mara was known as someone who fixed things that others threw away. Old fans, weak generators, bent tools, and cracked panels all found their way to her small shed. She spoke little, but her hands worked with patience and care. Every sound of metal turning or wire clicking felt like a conversation she understood well. She had not always lived this way. Years ago, Mara had a small house with clean walls and a steady routine. She worked regular hours and saved what she could. But deep inside her lived a memory from her childhood that never faded. When she was young, a storm once cut off her village from the outside world. Roads vanished underwater and people felt trapped. Then a helicopter arrived carrying food and medicine. The sound of its blades filled the sky, and fear slowly turned into relief. From that day, that sound stayed with her like a promise. As years passed, that memory grew stronger instead of weaker. While others dreamed of bigger homes or easier lives, Mara dreamed of machines that could lift, move, and save. She read old manuals and watched recordings whenever she could. She learned by fixing what was broken, always wondering how far her skills could go. Still, she never spoke about her dream because it sounded too large for a small town. One afternoon, a trader named Leon arrived pulling a flatbed trailer. On it sat a helicopter that looked tired and forgotten. Its body was covered in rust and dirt. One blade was gone, the seats were torn, and the engine looked silent and cold. People gathered quickly, curious at first and amused soon after. Some laughed and called it scrap. Others said it belonged in a junkyard. Leon stood nearby, hoping to sell it fast and leave. Mara arrived quietly and stood close without speaking. Her eyes followed every line and curve of the machine. She noticed where rust had eaten through metal and where parts were missing. She asked Leon calm questions about its past. Leon answered without interest and said it had been sitting unused for years. He said no one wanted it and that it was only good for metal. Mara listened carefully and nodded as if she agreed. That night, Mara made a decision that shocked everyone. She counted her savings one last time and knew it was not enough. So she sold her house and gave up the comfort she had built slowly over years. She sold her truck, her extra tools, and even things with personal value. By morning, everything she owned fit into 2 worn bags. She handed Leon the money without hesitation and claimed the helicopter as her own. The town watched in silence as the deal was done. Some whispered that she had lost her sense. Others felt pity and turned away. Trading a stable life for a broken flying machine felt foolish to them. Mara did not defend herself or explain her choice. She only felt calm, as if she had finally stepped onto the path she was meant to follow. The helicopter was moved into her shed with effort and noise. When the metal door closed, the outside voices faded. Inside the dim space, Mara stood alone with the machine. She touched its frame slowly, feeling the rough texture of rust and age. She did not see a failure. She saw potential waiting for patience and work. She knew it would not be easy, but she was not afraid. Days turned into weeks as Mara began her work. She cleaned every surface carefully and removed parts that could not be saved. She studied the engine for hours, learning its shape and needs. She built small tools from scraps and reused old pieces in new ways. Money was gone, but creativity was not. She slept on the floor of the shed and ate simple meals without complaint. People passed by sometimes and looked through cracks in the wall. They expected to see defeat, but they saw focus instead. Mara worked from sunrise to night, stopping only when her body demanded rest. She recorded every change and every mistake in a worn notebook. Each small success pushed her forward, even when progress felt slow. As months passed, the helicopter began to change. Rust gave way to clean metal. Missing parts were replaced with carefully crafted solutions. The shed filled with the sound of tools and quiet determination. Mara knew she was building something more than a machine. She was shaping an idea that had lived inside her since childhood. The town still believed she would fail. They saw only what was missing and ignored what was growing. But inside the shed, surrounded by metal and silence, Mara felt closer to her goal each day. She did not know when the moment would come, but she knew it would arrive. Something unexpected was being prepared, and when it was ready, no one would be able to ignore it. The rusty helicopter was no longer just scrap. It was the beginning of something that would soon change everything. Mara woke before the sun each day as the cold air wrapped around the shed and the metal walls breathed softly. She stretched her tired arms and looked at the helicopter standing quietly in the corner. It still looked rough, but to her it felt alive. Every bolt she touched felt familiar now. She spoke to the machine in her mind and imagined how it once moved through the sky. That image pushed her forward even when her body felt weak. Money was gone, so Mara learned to trade skills instead of coins. She repaired generators for farmers and fixed water pumps for nearby homes. In return, she asked for spare metal, old wires, unused tools, and broken parts. Some people agreed out of curiosity while others did it out of pity. Slowly, her shed filled with pieces that others had given up on. To Mara, each piece felt like a gift. One afternoon, a young boy named Theo stopped by the shed. He stood quietly near the door and watched her work. He asked careful questions and listened closely to her answers. He said he wanted to learn how machines worked. Mara nodded and let him help with small tasks. Theo cleaned parts and organized tools with pride. Soon, he came every day after school and shared stories from town. Through Theo, Mara learned what people were saying. Many believed she would quit soon. Some said she was wasting her life. Others laughed and made jokes about flying dreams that never left the ground. Hearing this did not anger her. Instead, it reminded her why she worked in silence. She was not building something for approval. She was building it because it mattered. As weeks passed, the helicopter began to look different. The body was cleaner and stronger. Mara replaced weak sections with reinforced panels she shaped herself. She rebuilt the control system using simple but reliable methods. Every step took time, and mistakes were common. Some nights she sat alone, staring at failed parts and wondering if she had gone too far. But every morning, she stood up and tried again. One evening, a strong storm hit the town. Winds howled and power lines fell. Roads flooded, and several homes lost electricity. People struggled in the dark and called for help that could not arrive quickly. Mara listened to the storm from her shed and remembered her childhood memory. She felt a deep pull in her chest. Her machine was not ready, but her purpose felt clearer than ever. The next day, she worked with renewed focus. She tested systems carefully and adjusted balance and weight. She built a practice rig to simulate movement and stress. Theo watched in awe as parts came together. He told others that something amazing was happening in the shed. Slowly, curiosity replaced laughter. People began to stop by more often and watch from a distance. An older mechanic named Saul visited one afternoon. He had worked on aircraft long ago and recognized the effort in Mara's work. He offered advice without judgment and shared knowledge she had never learned before. Mara listened carefully and respected his experience. With his help, she corrected small issues that could have caused serious problems later. The helicopter now looked strong and purposeful. It was not beautiful in a traditional way, but it carried a quiet strength. Mara painted it in simple colors and marked each system clearly. She created a checklist and followed it daily. Each completed test brought her closer to the moment she feared and desired the most. The town began to change its tone. People spoke less about failure and more about possibility. Children gathered near the shed and imagined flying. Farmers wondered if it could help during floods or emergencies. Even those who once laughed now watched with interest. Mara noticed but stayed focused. She knew hope could be fragile if not proven. One morning, she powered the engine for a short test. The sound filled the air and drew people from all directions. It was not flight, but it was a promise. The ground vibrated, and dust rose around the shed. Mara stood steady and calm as she monitored every gauge. When she shut it down safely, silence followed, then quiet excitement. Theo smiled wider than ever before. Saul nodded with approval. People whispered that something real was happening. Mara felt her heart race, but she kept her emotions hidden. She knew this was only one step. The hardest part was still ahead. That night, Mara sat alone in the shed and looked at the helicopter under soft light. She thought about the risks and the responsibility. If she failed, it would be seen by everyone. If she succeeded, it could change how the town survived future storms. She took a deep breath and accepted both possibilities. Outside, the town slept unaware that everything was close to changing. Inside the shed, Mara prepared for the moment when doubt would finally meet proof. The rusty helicopter was no longer just a project. It was becoming a symbol of belief, patience, and quiet courage. The morning felt different when Mara opened the shed door and stepped inside. The air seemed heavier and quieter, as if the space itself was holding its breath. She stood still for a moment and looked at the helicopter resting in front of her. It was no longer a pile of parts or a project in progress. It felt complete in a way that made her heart beat faster. She ran her hand along the metal and felt calm settle inside her. She spent the early hours checking every system again. She moved slowly and followed her list without skipping a single step. Fuel lines were inspected. Controls were tested. Balance was measured carefully. She treated every detail with respect because she knew small mistakes could grow into big problems. Theo arrived quietly and helped without speaking much. He could sense the importance of the day. By midday, word had spread across the town. People gathered near the airstrip and the shed. Some stood far away while others moved closer with careful steps. No one laughed this time. Faces showed curiosity mixed with concern. They were not sure what they would witness, but they knew it mattered. Saul stood near the front and watched closely with his arms crossed. Mara walked outside and felt the sun on her face. She could feel eyes on her from every direction. She did not speak to the crowd. She did not need to. Her focus stayed on the helicopter. She climbed into the seat slowly and adjusted the controls. Her hands were steady, but her chest felt tight. Years of effort had led to this moment. She started the engine carefully and listened as the sound filled the air. The blades began to move, slow at first and then steady. Dust rose around the machine and the ground vibrated. People stepped back instinctively. Mara watched the gauges and felt her breath match the rhythm of the machine. Everything responded as it should. The helicopter did not lift yet. She kept it grounded and tested movement gently. She shifted weight and adjusted controls with patience. The machine responded smoothly. A wave of relief passed through her. Theo held his breath nearby, and Saul leaned forward slightly. The sound of the blades echoed across the open land and reached every corner of the town. After a long moment, Mara made the decision she had prepared for in silence. She increased power slowly and felt the machine lighten. The ground seemed to loosen its hold. Then the helicopter lifted just a little and hovered briefly before settling back down. Gasps filled the air. It was not full flight, but it was enough to change everything. Mara shut the engine down and stepped out carefully. Her legs felt weak, but her eyes shone with determination. People stared at the helicopter as if seeing it for the first time. The sound of disbelief turned into quiet respect. No one cheered loudly. The moment felt too serious for noise. Saul approached her and spoke softly. He said it was stable and strong. He said she had done something rare. Mara nodded and listened without pride or fear. She knew there was more to do. That short lift was only proof that flight was possible. True purpose required more than that. That afternoon, dark clouds gathered again on the horizon. Weather reports spread quickly through town. Heavy rain was expected by night. People remembered the last storm and felt unease. Low areas near the river were at risk. Some families began to prepare for flooding. Fear returned quietly. Mara watched the sky and felt a familiar pull inside her. She thought about her childhood and the helicopter that once brought help. She looked at her own machine and understood its role clearly now. It was not built to impress. It was built to serve. She returned to the shed and made quick preparations. Theo followed her and asked if she was sure. Mara looked at him and nodded gently. She explained that machines gain meaning through action. Saul joined them and offered to assist with final checks. Together, they worked with focus and speed. Rain began to fall lightly as they finished. The helicopter was moved to the airstrip as water started to gather on the ground. People watched from shelters and doorways. Fear mixed with hope in their expressions. Mara climbed into the seat again and started the engine. This time, there was no hesitation. The blades spun with confidence. The helicopter lifted higher than before and stayed steady. Rain fell harder as it hovered above the ground. Gasps turned into wide eyes and held breaths. Mara guided the machine slowly forward and felt it respond perfectly. She had done it. She was flying. She did not go far at first. She circled the airstrip and tested control in the wind. The rain pressed against the windows and blurred the view, but her focus stayed sharp. She felt connected to the machine and the purpose behind it. Below her, the town looked small and fragile. When she landed safely, people rushed closer despite the rain. They did not shout or clap. They simply stared with wonder. Mara stepped out and felt the rain soak her clothes. She smiled for the first time in a long while. It was not a smile of pride. It was a smile of relief. The storm continued to grow stronger that night. Flood warnings spread quickly. But something had changed. The town no longer felt helpless. They had seen proof that help could rise from unlikely places. And inside the shed, under falling rain and spinning blades, a new chapter had quietly begun. Rain fell through the night and the river rose faster than anyone expected. By morning, water had crossed the lower roads and reached the edge of several homes. People moved belongings to higher ground and helped neighbors who could not move fast. Fear sat heavy in the air, but there was also a strange sense of readiness. Everyone kept looking toward the airstrip where the helicopter rested quietly. Mara woke before anyone called her. She listened to the rain and already knew what needed to be done. She put on her jacket and walked toward the shed with steady steps. The helicopter stood ready, its metal body dark with moisture. She ran her hands along the frame and felt no hesitation. This was why she had given up everything. This was the moment her work was meant for. Theo arrived running through the rain and told her that families near the river were trapped. Water had surrounded their homes and vehicles could not reach them. Mara listened carefully and nodded. She asked him to tell Saul and the others to prepare a safe landing area on higher ground. Her voice was calm, but her eyes were sharp with purpose. The engine started smoothly and the blades cut through the rain. People gathered under shelters and watched as the helicopter lifted into the gray sky. The sound was strong and steady, pushing against the storm. Mara guided the machine with focus and care. Wind pushed hard, but the helicopter responded with strength. She felt fear briefly, then let it pass. From above, she could see the damage clearly. Water covered roads and fields. Roofs stood like small islands. She spotted movement on a raised porch where a family waved cloth into the air. Mara hovered carefully and lowered a line she had prepared for this moment. One by one, the family was lifted to safety. Their faces showed disbelief mixed with relief. She flew back and forth through the storm, moving people from danger to safety. Each flight tested the machine and her own strength. Rain soaked everything and wind shook the air, but she stayed steady. On the ground, people guided and helped those she brought back. Saul coordinated quietly and efficiently. Theo watched with wide eyes and helped however he could. As the hours passed, exhaustion pressed in, but Mara did not stop. She remembered the helicopter from her childhood and the feeling of being saved. Now she was on the other side of that memory. Every flight turned doubt into trust. Every rescue changed the way the town saw her. By late afternoon, the rain began to slow. The river stopped rising and the worst danger passed. Mara guided the helicopter back to the airstrip and landed gently. The blades slowed and silence returned. For a moment, no one moved. Then people stepped forward slowly, as if afraid the moment might break. Families she had helped came forward with quiet thanks. Some held her hands. Some could not find words. Mara listened without speaking much. She felt tired in a deep way, but her heart felt full. The helicopter stood behind her, marked by rain and effort, but strong. In the days that followed, the town changed in ways no one expected. People no longer saw broken machines as useless. They saw potential. The shed that once held scrap became a place of learning and cooperation. Mara did not become loud or proud. She continued to work quietly, but she was no longer alone. Help arrived from nearby regions after hearing what had happened. Engineers and planners visited to see the helicopter and understand how it had been rebuilt. They were surprised by the simplicity and strength of the design. Mara shared her notes openly and answered questions with honesty. She did not claim brilliance. She spoke only of patience and purpose. Theo began learning more seriously and dreamed of building machines that helped people. Saul stayed involved and helped train others. The town invested in better preparation for future storms. The helicopter became part of an emergency plan, not as a symbol, but as a tool. Mara never returned to her old life because she no longer needed it. She had built something greater than comfort. She had built trust. When people spoke about her, they no longer spoke of failure or risk. They spoke of courage that grows quietly and strength that comes from care. One evening, as the sun set and light returned to the town, Mara stood near the airstrip and watched the sky. The helicopter rested nearby, silent and ready. She thought about how everything had begun with rust and doubt. She smiled softly, not because she was proud, but because she was at peace. She had traded everything she had for a broken machine. What she built next was not just a helicopter. It was a reminder that belief, when paired with effort, can lift more than metal. It can lift people. The town woke to a quieter morning after the storm, as if the land itself was resting. Mud covered the roads and broken branches lay everywhere, but people moved with calm purpose. They cleaned together and checked on one another. The helicopter rested near the airstrip, still and silent, yet everyone looked at it as if it were awake. Mara stood nearby and felt a deep sense of responsibility settle into her bones. In the days after the rescue, visitors arrived from nearby towns. They came to see the machine and the woman who rebuilt it. Some brought food and supplies as thanks. Others brought questions and ideas. Mara listened carefully and answered simply. She did not enjoy attention, but she understood its value. Attention could bring support, and support could save lives. Saul helped organize a small team to maintain the helicopter. He taught basic safety and routine checks. Mara encouraged others to learn and take part. She believed tools should belong to the people who depended on them. Theo watched closely and absorbed every lesson. His curiosity had turned into clear direction. He wanted to build and protect just like Mara. One afternoon, a group of planners suggested moving the helicopter to a larger city for display and study. They said it could inspire others. Mara listened and shook her head gently. She said it belonged where it was needed. She explained that machines lose meaning when taken away from their purpose. The planners understood and respected her choice. The town built a stronger shelter for the helicopter and improved the airstrip. They created emergency plans and practiced drills. Children learned where to gather during floods. Farmers learned how to signal for help. The helicopter became part of daily life, not as a miracle, but as a trusted partner. Mara returned to her shed and continued repairing old machines. She never stopped fixing what others discarded. But now people brought items with hope instead of doubt. They believed broken things could be useful again. That belief spread beyond metal and tools. It touched how people treated one another. Theo grew more confident and began designing small machines of his own. Mara guided him without pushing. She taught him patience and respect for failure. She told him mistakes were teachers, not enemies. Saul smiled when he watched them work side by side. One evening, as the sky turned orange and quiet, Mara sat near the helicopter and reviewed her old notebook. Pages were filled with notes, sketches, and crossed-out ideas. She realized how far she had come without ever planning fame or praise. She had followed a memory and trusted her hands. A soft wind moved across the airstrip and carried familiar sounds. For a moment, Mara closed her eyes and heard the echo of her childhood memory. The sound no longer felt distant. It felt complete. She had become the answer she once waited for. News of her work slowly spread beyond the region. Requests for help came from other towns. Mara agreed to assist when she could, but she never rushed. She believed preparation mattered more than speed. Each mission was planned carefully. Each flight carried weight and meaning. The helicopter flew many times after that. Sometimes it carried supplies. Sometimes it carried people. Sometimes it only tested the sky. Every flight strengthened trust. Every landing reminded Mara that belief must always be supported by care. The town no longer felt small or forgotten. It felt connected and ready. People stood taller knowing they had built something together. They no longer waited for rescue from far away. They knew help could rise from within. Mara never bought another house. She stayed close to her shed and the airstrip. Comfort no longer defined success for her. Purpose did. When people asked why she chose such a difficult path, she answered simply. She said some things are worth more than safety. Years later, children would hear the story and imagine rust turning into wings. They would learn that courage does not always shout. Sometimes it works quietly until the moment it is needed most. Mara stood beneath the open sky as the helicopter rested nearby. She felt tired in a good way. She felt whole. What she had built was never just a machine. It was proof that when belief meets effort, even the heaviest doubt can lift.